We're back, part 2 with Bob Addison. This is a few days later from our first talk, and it's April 2017, and Bob's got a list of points he thinks he wants to talk about, so that's where we'll start. So what's first on your list?
Well, I made a list to call your attention to the Christmas programs that we used to have, and we were always dressed up in attire that was Christmassy, and the men, and I remember some of the men, we get together and it was sort of a semi-dance, I guess it was. And of course, always the program was had singing as usual for that sort of thing. And it was I guess most everybody was engaged in it. But in recent years, Hard Top Off kind of took it over, and it made it. We had some good Christmas programs.
When in the early days with the Christmas program, where did you have it? Where did you?
Well, they always were held at the what is now the Rodeo Tavern.
And was it?
Well, no, I'm wrong on that.
Okay.
Not the Rodeo Tavern, it's the community center in
The
Rodeo.
And was it a joint Portal Rodeo get together?
Yeah, it was mostly Portal to begin with, but you know, in recent years, I think that the two communities have a much closer association than they did then.
Huh.
And I think that today it seems like more and more there's integration of the programs and the people and so on between Rodeo and Portland. At least that's my feeling about it.
Why did you hold it in Rodeo for the Christmas thing back in the...
Well, I guess it was because, you know, they had the big community center.
Oh.
A lot of space.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
Oh, the dances were held in the tavern.
Yeah.
They'd move the tables all around the room, and then the dances were in the middle.
Now, were the dances that you're talking about, were they just at Christmas, or did you have...
Oh, no, the dances were every Thursday night.
Oh, well, tell me about those. I don't know about those.
We had a lot of fun. You know, I think I danced with every lady that ever came to that dance, because I always figured that some people kind of were bystanders, and I figured that all of them needed to dance, and so I danced with them.
And well, that's wonderful. Who was the band? Where did the music? Tell me about
that was Kim Murphy's wife. Furnished. She had canned music, and she furnished the music.
Oh, I see. What kind of dance was it? What kind of dancing did you?
I can tell you, any kind of dancing went.
Yeah.
Any kind of dancing.
Sounds like fun.
It was fun.
And this was every Thursday night?
Every Thursday night. It was for quite some time, and then Kim's wife, she became ill, and so it faded away.
Did he? I happen to know since Kim played fiddle. Did he? Kim Murphy played fiddle. Did he ever play at dances or
No.
for dances? No.
No, not at those dances, he didn't.
But you were saying, what did he play for? He played at some.
Well, I don't know that he played for, well, sometimes he played at the St. Patrick's Day Parade.
That's what I'm thinking because I've seen a picture.
I did play. I played the fiddle too in the St. Patrick's Day Parade, and he was a very good fiddler, probably better than I was. His only problem, he had a little bit of problem in the timing, and you know, when you're dancing or anything like that, timing is important.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember we were up the classroom one time, and there's a group of us there, and I was having trouble because Kim, I thought the timing was a little off, and I said, Kim, you dance, let me play. So we did. We swapped.
I was going to say, did he take that okay? Did he?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
What else have you got on your list, Bob?
The parade, the St. Patrick's Day Parade, they always had these, what they call it, a kazoo band. You know, one of these little things that you hum into.
Uh-huh.
And it always started up about where Penny Johnson used to live, and they would most of the people participated in the band itself. There's very few bystanders, and it started up at Penny Johnson's place, and it came all the way down to the store.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was anything particular, like maybe somebody, a few people would do a dance or they'd have a reading or something like that, that always happened in front of the library.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gene Wadsworth played the piano.
Piano, yeah.
It wasn't a piano.
Yeah, they call it keyboard.
A keyboard.
Yeah.
They'd end up the parade at the library. Everybody gathered at the library, and so she played Gene played the piano, and people sang. Then they always had cookies and cakes and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And that's, just for the record, that's still going on today.
That's
where we met, and I asked you if we could talk this year.
That's right. It's still going on, and I suppose it will continue. Well, yeah, it will, because the people that were head of it this year were more or less the newcomers, not the old timers.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to continue all right.
Yeah. What else what's next on your list?
And then I think we only mentioned the July 4th parade at Rodeo, but there's quite a few people from Portal who go to that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I might mention is Hard Top Off always dressed up like Uncle Sam. Mm-hmm. You maybe know about that.
I've seen pictures, but you should explain, he's not just, anyway, you should explain his costume for people.
Oh, he was about, well, at least six feet off of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And with this long striped pants and matching shirts and so on.
Yeah.
And so he always participated in that.
Yeah, it's quite a,
And I don't remember seeing him last year in the parade, but I'm sure that if he's around, he'll be in it again.
yeah, it's quite a sight to see. So he's on stilts. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Oh, and then people from Animas, Rodeo, and so on, and 4-H clubs and so on, they always had a part in the parade. And another one, I told you about the buildings and the classrooms that was put up. Well, she, I think, we really owe her a debt of gratitude for providing the land for which the buildings, on which the buildings were built. And the buildings now house the fire trucks and classroom, ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
So they pretty much, they tie in very closely, like the ambulance ties in very closely with Douglas, and sometimes when they have to take someone to the hospital, the Douglas people from Douglas meet them up the road. They sometimes they take them all the way in, but sometimes they meet the people from Douglas.
I think besides the land, it's another example. The building of the buildings was a real community effort.
Oh, it was. Now, I didn't, a little bit, not much. I didn't participate in that very much, but Don Wadsworth, he spent a lot of time at that. And Bob Deering.
Yeah.
Well, volunteers from everywhere that put that building up. We had a writing group, and we still have a writing group. I think maybe my wife and I were part of the original group that they started writing, and we met at the gallery, the gallery in Rodeo. And we always would write something for the meetings. We had the meetings. I remember we had meetings once a week. We'd write a story, whatever it would happen to be, or part of a story, and then we would read what we had read, what we had written. At that meeting, and it was held in the, well, you know, you've been in the gallery down there, you know what it was like. It was held right there, and we had it was published about 2 or 3 little booklets that we published at 8 by 11.
Oh, neat.
If you want to, you can borrow a copy. I've got a copy of one of those. And you could see what we did.
Oh, neat.
And that writing group, I think, is still going now.
It is, and
Yeah.
it's still a weekly, and they rotate it. Instead of being at the gallery, they move it around to people's homes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now I belong to the book club. It's of more recent origin. There's a meeting. We meet the first Tuesday of the first Tuesday of each month. We meet up there. In the meantime, we had selected one meeting is that we pick out the books for the year ahead that we're going to read, and everybody chips in, and it's usually about half of the books that we read will be nonfiction and half of them will be fiction. And we select those books for the year ahead, and each person, somebody is selected from the group to lead the discussion each Tuesday night, the first Tuesday of each month. In fact, this coming Tuesday, we'll be meeting up at the library.
So you're still going?
Oh yeah, still going. One of my favorite pastimes nowadays is reading.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite things that you like reading?
I enjoy, I think, mostly the nonfiction historical type books. That especially those that setting is back in 1200 or 1300.
Really?
I enjoy those very much, and of course I like books on the outdoors.
Yeah.
I like those very much.
Huh.
I've reached a place that I don't really like as well as the other. I don't like the novels.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Romances and so on. I don't care for those too much.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a nonfiction, and as I got older, I've become more and more interested in history for some reason. So, but boy, that's fascinating to me. You have that time period, the 1200 to 1300.
Yeah,
I don't know. I wonder how you developed that, or that's interesting.
Yeah, that's those books I enjoy very much.
Is it a?
And there's a couple of books that we had that the fellow that wrote it, the first person that they wrote a book about a little over 50 years ago, and the people that wrote it, the fellow started up in what the province just out of Maine, and they made a trip down the coast, down through Boston, all the way down to the border between Mexico and U.S., across the border to the west, up the west coast, ended up in Alaska.
Amazing.
And and it was mostly about birding and that sort of thing, outdoors. And then a sequel to that book was written by a fellow, a modern day writer, and it was 50 years later that he wrote and it made the same trip. Different people.
Yeah. The first trip that you described where they went all the way, what era was that, or how long ago was that?
Well, let's see. I'd say probably 50, 60 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's the birding author, the fellow that writes so many guidebooks?
Oh, Peterson?
Peterson.
Peterson?
Peterson was one of those with that first book was written by Peterson and his counterpart in Great Britain.
Yeah.
50 years later, of course, this other person wrote this other book. Those are the kind of books I enjoy. Those kind of books, aside from those historicals.
Yeah.
You know about the soup kitchen? It's just not too old. it started since, of course, since Jane and I came here, but well, it's of course it's a kind of a festive event, social event, but it's the main purpose of it is to raise money for the Portal Rescue, and they make some $8,000, something like
That's
that.
exactly what they made this year, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
$7,000 or $8,000.
Yeah.
And it's a neat thing where people in the community donate soup.
Oh yeah. Up until this year, I've always contributed a crock pot full of soup. Usually I make a beef stew.
Yeah.
This is the first year I missed it. Well,
Oh.
I had my girls came and so I didn't make the soup this year, but they have about a table bigger than this, covered with crock pots full of soup.
I know, and then you pay.
And it's a pretty good money raiser.
Yeah.
In addition to a drawing for prizes, about 20 prizes. Well, you know, I might make a comment about retirement. This community is full of retirees, as you well know. And some people retire and it seems that they're busier after they retire than what they were before. When I retired, I thought that what my main interest was going to be do a little traveling and sightseeing, and enjoy life, taking it easy. But you know, you get caught up in some of these things in the community, and I haven't contributed as much as what I ought to, undoubtedly, with the feeling that of other people, but I still think that retirement is something that a person ought to relax. I kind of got tired of the bureaucracy, and it was nice to be able to do what you wanted to when you wanted to do it.
You know, one thing you didn't mention, Bob, was there's a hiking group, and I know you used to join that. Can you say something about the hiking?
For years, I hiked with the group up until we went to Maine. When we came back, I dropped out, but I hiked until I was over 80 years old.
Are there any, and this is another group that happens in Portal, and they get together once a week usually, is hiking.
Yeah,
Did you have any favorite hikes, memories of favorite hikes you used to do or had done? You were telling one, I was thinking about Crystal Mountain, that's just a story.
well, that hike up to Crystal Mountain, I always really enjoyed that very much. We used to go to Skeleton. That was one of my favorite hikes too.
What did you like about Crystal Mountain, and then what did you like about Skeleton Canyon?
Well, I enjoyed it. For Crystal Mountain, you have beautiful sights from up there. The scenery is good, and then looking at all those rocks, those crystals.
Yeah.
There was a lot of them.
Yeah, quartz crystals. You had a funny story, and I want you to share it about Pat Willie on a hike one time to Crystal Mountain.
Pat had as we talked about before.
Yeah.
Pat had a tendency to get lost. And
Yep.
he'd go off in a direction and wouldn't know where he was. For some reason or other, he just didn't.
Yeah.
Well, he even got lost coming down down that mountain one time.
And what's funny about it for people that don't know is Crystal Mountain, there's no trees. You can see for a long way. So how could you get lost on that? Oh.
I remember one time, Bill Gunn he was making a recording of bird songs. And he passed away, I guess, from what I understand, before he finished that up. Anyway, I didn't know Bill. He passed away about the time that we got here, or maybe a little earlier. But he got to know Lucy, his wife. In fact, Lucy owned and lived at that place where Gloria now lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we were up on that mountain one day, up on the Crystal Mountain. She had a nice little crystal. She brought it and she says, I'm going to give this one to you because I like you. that was Lucy's comment on that.
And then the other one you said was Skeleton was one of your favorite.
Oh yeah, Skeleton
and
was
why was that a favorite hike?
It was favorite hike, and beautiful rocks, and nice vegetation, and flowers and so on. But it's closed now. In fact, they say that it's, you hear all kind of rumors about the illegals, and they say that's a prime passageway for the illegals to come across. And another place that I enjoyed hiking is just right over here at this first canyon, south of where we are.
Is that Sulphur Canyon? Is it Sulphur?
Yeah, Sulphur Draw.
Sulphur Draw, that's
Sulphur
it.
Draw.
Yeah, that's a pretty area.
Yeah.
Lots of oaks. I've been up there.
Ash Spring is I've hiked that.
Yeah. Right out your window here, and I don't know that it has a name. There's at the base of the mountains. There's a conical hill. And
Yeah.
I don't know that has a name, but you were telling that when you walk, there's something interesting up there.
Well, there's some big rocks. They're like maybe 3 feet long and a foot and a half wide and so on, different shapes. But they're arranged in a pattern up the top of that mound that
Yeah, it's interesting.
that makes you feel like, well, I'd almost defend it from the standpoint that I think that without any question it was man-made. They were man-made.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
mentioned that to Alden one time, Alden Hayes, and he said, "Oh, don't start a rumor." But anyway, right on top of that mound, you can see it from our kitchen there.
Do you have any guesses what you thought that might be? What that was used for, or any guesses or thoughts?
I always felt in my own mind that maybe it was some kind of a place that maybe the Indians used as a ceremonial place. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah, but that's what
I think about it.
That's what I thought of. Why would big rocks and? Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth looking at. I'm gonna ask you a few questions that I wrote down,
Yeah, okay.
and one of them I'm sort of gonna tease you a little bit. I'm gonna tease you a little bit because in the first tape you have this thing, and I ask you about why you picked this location for your house.
Yeah,
And you talked about there was a well and I don't know, septic, I don't remember.
septic system and a well.
Yeah, and then you sort of smiled and you said, because it's isolated, it's kind of, the view, that was another thing, and you like to be isolated. Now here's I thought of two things. I go, well, gee, for a guy that likes to be isolated, here you were involved in the writing group, going to dances on Thursday, and you did all these social things. And so I go, wait a minute, usually I think of a guy that wants to be isolated, leave me alone. And I just think that's funny. You were very, very involved in lots of activities here.
Well, yeah, it seems that those are sort of in contrast, but
Yeah,
Gene and I, we've always loved the outdoors, and we did birding even before I retired. We did a lot of birding, and I guess you find what we like, scenic scenes and the birding and animals and trees and so on. We like to be where those things are, and if you're house to house to next door neighbors, why
yeah.
you don't have that.
Yeah. But I'm still, they do seem like a contrast, because you like, oh, I see, you liked being isolated so you could do bird watching and enjoy the scenery and nature, but you also enjoyed the social things that you did, hiking.
Yeah, that's two sides to it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I like to dance.
Yeah.
I like to go to those dances, and then I like the book club and the writers group and so on. I enjoyed those, but those happened and the hiking. I did like that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite people hiking was with Jean Williams. She never was at a loss for words, because she talked a lot when we were
Walking.
yeah.
Yeah. So you enjoyed that. Did you start dancing as a young man? When did you learn you loved dancing?
No, never danced at all until
Oh.
it was college.
Uh-huh.
I was at Ohio State. We used to do square dancing. We had a big series of basketball courts side by side. There was about 6 of them, and the basketball courts were crossways to the building.
Yeah.
And we'd have that almost filled up with square dancers.
Wow.
And that's the first dancing I think I ever did was square dancing at the university.
Yeah. And did you, when you met your wife and you got married, when you were together, did you dance a lot?
No.
No?
Jean didn't particularly like to dance. She didn't like to dance, but square dancing she did.
Yeah.
She enjoyed that.
Yeah.
We had, of course, musicians. It wasn't canned music. We had fiddlers, guitar players, and someone that called the dances and so on.
But you didn't do that back in when you were growing up in Virginia.
No,
No, because they had a lot of square dancing.
no,
Yeah.
never danced at all.
Yeah. That sort of leads me to my other question. And the last time we met, you talked about being in Virginia, and I got an idea that, and you were saying it was a tough life growing up.
Yeah,
And you were growing up and the Depression happened, but it really didn't affect your family so much. I was just curious about, I don't know, a little bit more about when you were a young person growing up, what it was like. Because I got the picture you were on a farm, maybe, or
if you'd call it that, as a farm, and we had. I expected, I don't know how much acreage, probably 125, 150 acres, and it was real hilly.
mm-hmm.
In fact, that county that I grew up in, the biggest flat place in the county was 12 acre bottom along the creek.
Wow. So yeah, you wouldn't call it a farm area.
So, but we had enough fields cleared where we lived. You could grow corn and enough hay for the horses, the cows. We kept horses. We had a couple of horses to do the work. About two or three cows, and we always had about a half a dozen pigs that we'd butcher every fall, and we grew sorghum. We'd make molasses, and my mother did a lot of canning. She had to can enough stuff summertime to last over the winter time. So it was a kind of tough life, but I guess it was an enjoyable life as far as I'm concerned.
Didn't you have a big family? A lot of brothers and sisters?
There were 9 of us altogether.
Yeah.
Three half brothers. There's 2 half sisters and 1 half brother, and 6 full brothers and sisters.
It sounds like it was a tough life, but it was a good life.
Yeah, and the reason I say the Depression didn't affect us because we grew almost everything that to feed us.
Mm-hmm.
You had to buy like sugar and coffee and we call it coal oil, kerosene. We dug our own coal. We dug our own coal.
And the coal was used for heating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Huh. And I know when we talked before, I had this picture when you were real young, or image that you liked playing in the creeks and being outside and running around.
Yeah.
And it was that
Barefooted.
Well, that sounds like a good life. A good way to grow up.
It's a good life and a tough life.
Well,
But we enjoyed it, I guess. Well, we didn't know anything any different. So I guess that we enjoyed it because somebody from New York City would look at it and they'd say it would have been a hell of a life. But as it was, that's the only thing we knew.
yeah. I have.
And if we hadn't have moved to Ohio when we did, I probably would never have finished high school. Because the high school, the closest one was TMI. And it was about 6 miles away, and they did have a few people that could stay there. My sister did, my older sister did, but otherwise you had to walk back and forth.
And so what was it about moving to Ohio that was helpful about graduating high school? Or?
Yeah, we went to, I went to high school, started as a freshman and went through high school, and first job I had out of high school was in the CCCs.
You might explain for people that maybe see this in the future that don't know what's the CCC and what you did. What was the CCC?
Civilian Conservation Corps. Ours was an erosion control camp. I was, one of my teachers got me in as a so-called local experienced man, an LEM. And the only difference that you get $30 a month. A regular enrollee in the CCCs, $25 of that money went to the family.
Mm-hmm.
But a local experienced man, so-called, I didn't have any experience, but that's the way I got it. And I could keep all the money that they paid me. It was for families that were pretty much down and out, and they had to have a little income of some kind.
Yeah.
That was in the Depression days, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Middle of the Depression.
Yeah. And
When I didn't spend too long in the CCCs. One of the things that they found out that my father was a carpenter, supposedly, and so they had these barracks with all of the enrollees lived in. They were long barracks with a double screen door, one on each end of the building. It's like a building there, and a double door in the middle.
Mm.
And the first job that I was assigned was to take all of those, change all of the screws on those hinges on those. There'd be two doors, two screen doors. There'd be, I had to take all those out and put new bolts on. And then part of the time I was out with the crews, and we built check dams in gullies and stuff like that. Erosion control.
Is that what got you to go to college? Because you studied, or you worked in the field, in that field?
Well, I got a job with a contractor. See, the CCCs paid $30 a month.
Mm-hmm.
The contractor was 30 cents an hour.
Oh. I'm figuring that out in my head.
And so I got this job with a contractor in Mount Vernon, Ohio, and I worked with them for a while, and most of the time I was a hod carrier.
I have no idea what that is. A hod carrier?
A hod carrier. Well, the fellow that I worked with, he was a bricklayer, and you had a big low box that you mixed the cement and the sand and gravel, and you mixed it by hand, and water, mixed it by hand, and carried that to the bricklayer.
Was the container called a hod?
No, the hod was a board about this big square
Okay.
with a handle on the bottom. You
Oh,
put it on your shoulder,
yes.
so you put the cement that was ready mixed for him to lay the bricks, and
I've seen those.
I ended up carrying that up a ladder to him.
Yeah, I've seen those.
That was one of my jobs, and
Yeah.
I kind of made up my mind. Well, I'm not going to be well, I did some shovel and pick and shovel work, but I'm not going to do this all my life, and that stimulated me to see if I could go to the university, which I did.
And
Didn't have any money to do it. My folks didn't have any money either.
so how did you manage to go to college then?
Well, I saved enough to start, and I worked every Saturday, and I worked about every day. I was either in a restaurant, dishwasher or something, And I worked part-time at the university greenhouse,
Oh,
and that's where I met Jean.
yeah, your wife.
Yeah.
Later to be your wife.
Yeah. I remember I was always hard up for money. Didn't have any money. And the last year of school, for some reason, I needed a little bit more money, and I remember going downtown Columbus, Ohio, and at the down at the governor's office building, and all of the state employees, and this building was a big square building, and there was I think about 8 stories high. And I remember standing on the sidewalk one time, and I looked up at that, and then I thought, now, there's somebody in that building needs help, needs to work, needs somebody to work. And I started the first floor and worked myself.
And just ask people?
And I came away from there with a job for 50 cents an hour, which was quite an increase
Yeah.
for 50 cents an hour. And I could work at the university, all hours I needed,
Oh.
which was a lifesaver for me.
Yeah. And then, didn't you, I know you worked in soil conservation for this,
Yeah.
right? And that was what you studied, and it's interesting.
No, it was just general agriculture. Agricultural education is what I majored in, and I didn't really know what.
How did you end up with your job in soil conservation service?
Well, when I came home after World War II. See, I went right out of college.
Oh.
In fact, I graduated. I got my diploma on a Monday, and a Wednesday I was on a troop train.
Oh, yeah, we skipped a bunch. I skipped a bunch of time. Yeah.
It was June of 1941.
And where did you go in the service?
And we went on the troop train. It took us to California. Camp Roberts, was in the infantry.
Mm.
And and I learned to type in high school, and that changed my career completely. Otherwise, if I hadn't have known how to type, I'd have been in the infantry. I probably wouldn't be here today.
Because they put you in an office job?
They put me in the office in
Oh.
Camp San Luis Obispo.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh. Isn't that funny how little things like that can change your life?
I'm sure that changed my life completely.
Yeah.
And from there, I did typing, and then we started machine records units, which that was the beginning of, I think it was the beginning of all this fancy stuff that we have today, computers. Computer, you can have a little thing like that. And here we had these big things about 6, 8 feet long, about that wide, weigh about a ton.
Now, what was that?
That was our, where we had to, and they had the old punch card system.
Yeah.
I was a punch card operator for a while, and then I was a code clerk, and then I went to OCS from there. But anyway, I don't know what my life would have been like otherwise.
Yeah.
It'd been like my cousin, Bob Addison. His name was Bob. He was just a year younger than I, and he got married, had 2 children. He was called up in about 13 weeks of training, and he went overseas, and within a month he was gone.
Mm.
He went to Germany.
Yeah. Oh. Oh.
So that's, I could just as well have been doing that
Yeah.
as not.
Yeah. OCS was Officer Candidate School.
Yeah,
So you went to training and became an officer in the Army then?
yeah.
Oh. How long did you stay in the Army?
Well, from 41 to 46,
Okay.
5 years.
Yeah. That's quite a while, so.
I was a first lieutenant, I was a second lieutenant, and a first lieutenant, and a captain when I got out of the Army. And got back in again in the Korean War, but
Huh.
never did go overseas then.
Oh, so you had 2 times you were in.
Yeah.
How did you end up working in soil conservation service?
My teacher in high school, in fact, he was the one that recommended I get into the CCCs when I got out of high school. But he was, when I got home in 1946, he was an employee of the Soil Conservation Service. And through him, I got a job. I kind of, I didn't think I was fitted to be a teacher anyway. And I had a little bit of experience at that erosion control in the CCCs. So I started in Ohio in the Soil Conservation Service. It's called Resource Conservation and Development, RC&D, I think it is. Well, I had a real good career with the SCS we call it.
Yeah. And
I never would imagine that I would have had the kind of career that I did have.
now, why do
But
you?
even though I was behind the desk for several years, and I moved on up as time going on, but I really enjoyed the time that I was working with farmers, getting farmers to recognize that water runs downhill.
And in that water can be part of your, and in that water can be some of your soil, right?
Yeah. People don't think about that, but
Yeah.
I've often thought I should have written a book about water runs downhill. The consequences of water running downhill. And it does have a lot of consequences,
Yeah.
Erosion, flooding.
Well, we can see that here in Portal, right?
Oh,
Oh
sure.
boy, there's good examples around here.
Yeah.
Big boulders that had come down the hill from the, yeah, that's funny. That could be the title of your book, Water Runs Downhill.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, I think it'd make a good book, all right. Well, yeah, we got farmers, if there was any, not very much hills where I worked in Ohio, but even running the roads across the slope rather than up and down, it made a big difference.
Yeah, yeah.
Getting them to put in grass waterways where we could, building farm ponds,
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Were the farmers pretty receptive or willing to take your advice?
Yeah, I'd say so.
No,
I'd say so.
that's neat.
Even though I didn't have a lot of experience, so I went to a training session a few times, but we got along okay. Yeah, I enjoyed working with the farmers. I was in 6 different counties, and then I became an area conservationist in charge of the six counties. Then I went to New Hampshire, from there to New York State, and then from there to Philadelphia.
Mm.
But I mentioned the fact that I got kind of tired of the bureaucracy, but the further up the line you went, the more bureaucratic it became.
Yeah. So is
Can't
it?
get away from it.
No, I know it's the same way today in any
Yeah,
government.
you can't get away from it.
Was it, so then, it was a good thing when you retired, you were ready to retire, I take it,
Yeah.
yeah. And then yeah. I have one last question for you, okay? And then if there's anything you wanna add, my question is, when we talked last time, and you mentioned you were 99, and I asked you, do you have any advice for us young folks? Okay? And here's what you said, 3 things, okay? Take it one day at a time, have a good outlook on life, and good friends are helpful. And so I'm wondering if you can say any more about that, how you came up with those things, or if today, a couple days later, you'd add anything. I thought it was great advice.
No, I don't think I need to add very much to that. I do a lot of thinking nowadays, a lot of reading, and I think my philosophy toward that is to stay positive, and rather than the other way around. I think a person has has to stay positive if they want to live long, and I have a philosophy toward what I eat. That I think my dad's family, he was in a family of 15 boys. 13 boys and 2 girls. That they passed, I think they passed away at an early age. Like, I doubt if very many of them went beyond 70. I think I had 1 or 2 uncles that went up to into their 80s, but most of them passed away early. And it was the kind of diet that we had when I was a kid, and had a lot to do. Had a lot to do with the fact that they passed away early. I ate a small amount of meat, lots of vegetables, and I always try to have a salad. Green vegetables.
Every day you have a salad?
I practically every day I have a salad, yeah. Well, I think eating green vegetables like peas, beans, and so on.
Yeah.
And fortunately, you can go in most all of the grocery stores. You'll have you can go in the middle of winter and you can get a frozen beans or peas and so on.
Yeah.
You can always have good vegetables just as if they were right out of the field.
Have you been doing that for a long time? You're eating your
And I never liked. We always had pork and chicken once in a while, but pork and pork fat, I just can't go. And I think pork fat is something that just as well stay away from.
Can you give me any tips about how to keep a good outlook and stay positive? Because I find it hard sometimes. And I agree with you. Is there anything you do or learned or suggest or?
Well, it's like, in a way, it's like you pick up a book to read, and you start reading it, and maybe you get 20, 30 pages into it, and you think. Suddenly you stop and you think, well, what in the hell am I reading this for?
Yeah, I do
because
that.
I don't like it at all, so I lay it back down and get something that I like, that is worthwhile. And I sometimes at night I lay down and I think about things back when, things that I should have done different, and it worries me. And then suddenly I look, hummingbird came to the window.
Oh, I missed it. Oh.
And
Yeah.
I get to thinking about things like that, and I think, well, why am I worrying about that? Because it's done. There's nobody, and then you can't change it. It's not going to help any to worry about it. So look to the future and look to something that's more pleasant. And even though maybe I did some things that I shouldn't have, and so on, but I can, based on the fact that I did something wrong, I can look forward to the future and not repeating anything like that.
Boy, does that make sense to me.
Having good friends, I think I have some good friends here in Portal, and that makes a difference too.
And can you say more about that, why you feel that's important? Or?
Well, you know, I think Gloria has a philosophy on that sort of thing. She has many friends, but I know this, that if something happens to me, well, not only the EMTs, but I have friends I think that would look after me all right.
Mm-hmm.
And my family, my mother and dad especially, well, just to be face up to it, he was kind of a mean guy.
Mm.
And I made up my mind, if I ever had a family, I'm not going to have that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
A man and a woman that, if they pledged themselves to be married, and if they love each other, then they shouldn't be fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I said to Gene. I said, we're not going to fight ever. That's it. And we didn't either.
I was just going to ask you that.
And I told you that if my wife had lived about a couple of weeks longer, we would have been married 73 years.
Well,
Even though the last almost 20 years has been pretty sad.
yeah, because of her health issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever get angry at your wife? And if so, what did you do? Because I think we all get angry.
No, I don't think I ever got married got angry with Jean. She got angry with me a time or two, but it was just a momentary thing.
Oh.
I remember a little incident that we didn't live very high on the hog for a while after
Mm-hmm.
after I got out of the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a pump in the kitchen. We didn't have running water, but we had a pump.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those old force pumps. You push it down
I've seen them.
and it squirts.
Yeah, I know it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gene was in the garden just down a few feet from the house. And I yelled at her out the window, and I said, Gene, look at the end of that hose. There's something wrong. And
I know what happened.
she was angry with me for a little while about that. The water squirted right in her face. I thought it was funny, but and she did after a while, but it was kind of a mean thing to do. She was a very level-headed person, and she ran on an even keel pretty much all her life too. She's pretty smart.
Mm-hmm.
She, I guess I told her she had a master's degree in floriculture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was saying, for a woman in that era, I think, to have a master's degree was really something, you know.
Yeah. And she came off of a farm too.
It sounds like you've had a good life. I know before you were saying your kids are very close. As a family still, you're close.
Yeah, my kids and both my wife and I, we've been very close over the years. In fact, I just had a email from my oldest daughter this morning. They were here one daughter was here for 2 weeks about 2 weeks in February, and then a week later, two other daughters came, and they were here for a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice. That's great.
And they did practically all of the cooking while they were here too, and they're all good cooks. And my wife was not a cook at all when she. Her mother was not the greatest cook in the world, but anyway, Jean's philosophy toward that was that she said, well, while she wasn't a cook, she figured that anybody could read could cook.
Did you do some of the cooking then when you guys were married, or did she do it?
She did pretty much.
All of it?
Pretty much cook. I was gone so much
Yeah.
over the years when I was working.
Yeah. Huh.
All my hobbies, I like woodworking and I do a little bird carving and various other things like that. I enjoyed working with wood.
How long have you been doing carving? I didn't know you did carving.
Do you remember Bill Reinbold?
Yes, he was good friends with Don, yeah.
Well, when I started carving with him, and I carved half a dozen or more birds and painted.
Mm-hmm.
The painting was tougher for me than what the carving was.
Okay, so Bob's went in the other room and got his birds here that he carved.
That's the first one I carved,
Yeah. Oh.
a black-throated sparrow. And this is about the last one, although I've got some that I need to finish. You know what that is? A woodcock. You know,
it's a woodcock because it's got a big long bill.
Some people call them timber doodles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is kind of my favorite. Painting was something that was pretty tough for me to do.
Yeah.
I did it, I think, about the third time before I quit. But anyway, every book, I have about 6 different books, guidebooks, and there's none two of them are alike at all as far as the color of the paint that goes on. So I selected one and stuck with it.
Why did you choose to carve a timber doodle? Favorite bird? Or?
Well, yeah, I kind of liked that, and we had timber doodles up in New Hampshire.
Yeah, we have them in Minnesota. I should have known.
Sure.
Yeah, they do a neat thing where they flutter up when they the mating thing. They fly up in the air.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. They're beautiful.
This is a very common. You know that. It's
Yeah,
a very
from down
common
here.
one around here. And the funny thing is that up at Portal, you get up toward the canyon, you don't see these at all.
Mm-hmm.
None. This was my favorite one right here.
Yeah. It's a beauty. Yeah, it's a beauty.
I don't know whether it's, it looks like any of them that are in the books, but it's probably a kind of a combination of, you have to select one and follow it as much as you can. Yeah, these are two of my favorite birds. I have lots of black-throated sparrows out here.
Yeah. Portal is a very unique community.
It is too.
And that's where I wanted to try to, by talking to people that have lived here a long time, have them describe, well, what's unique about this community?
I think that Portal has more, I bet that for a small community, about as many PhDs as
Yeah.
you'd find in most any community across the country.
And that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and people never think about that, but and people here, just because somebody has a PhD,
Mm-hmm.
treat them like everybody else, you know.
Mm-hmm.
People who have who are experts in various fields and have a PhDs and so on. Well, naturally, you look up to them.
Mm-hmm.
You look up to them, but as far as a person, you treat them like everybody else.
Yeah.